Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Take Real Estate with the Joseph team, where we give you the real take on today's housing market and everything real estate. I'm your host, Maddie Maloney, and I am joined alongside by my co-hosts,
Joe Sambear
and Sam Fada.
Today, we are going to be talking about the closing process. So this is probably the exciting week. You know, the end is finally in sight. You see the closing table, you're gonna get there. And so we want to talk about everything that you can expect during this closing week, what you can expect from the loan side, and what it actually looks like at the closing table. Most often people don't really even know where they're going to. Is this all online? Do I meet, the agent or the other sellers? So we're going to be going through everything that you can expect during this week to really just kind of ease some of your worries. We know that it has most likely been a roller coaster of emotions getting to this point, whether you made multiple offers and finally got one accepted, going through the loan process, and now we're here. So really wanted to just dive into what everything looks like that week. So Sam, I'm going to start off with you on, what is the first document that the borrowers are able to expect at this point once we get to the last week right before closing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the closing disclosure is the document you're speaking of, which is comparative to the loan estimate that you would have received in the beginning of the process. So the two documents go hand in hand. That initial loan estimate was our first disclosure of the fees, of your monthly payment, of your total costs, the bottom line amount due at closing. And then the closing disclosure is what you'll receive that final week of closing, which lays out basically all the final details of the loan and exactly what's going to be due at closing.
So are those the final numbers that they should expect to be paying and maybe the final figures that they should expect to be bringing to the closing table?
Yeah, so there's a waiting period. So there's an initial closing disclosure you'll receive at least 3 days before closing. And that is our best estimate at that time of what those numbers look like, because our closing department hasn't finalized the details with the title company yet. So you'll receive one at least 3 days before closing that will urge you to sign and say that it has to be signed 3 days before closing to keep that on track. Otherwise, we can run into delays. So there's one that's going to be very crucial that 3 days before closing that we'll want you to look out for. And it could come a week or 2 weeks before closing. It just kind of depends on how behind or how up to date our closing department is to get those documents out to you. So at that point, we'll have that final approval, and then we'll disclose those numbers to you. You'll sign them, and then we'll let you know at least a day or two, hopefully longer than that, before closing. We'll get you that final numbers with the final instructions for closing.
So the key point to know that with the closing disclosure that you're going to receive, that first one, this is not the point when you're going to go to your bank to get that cashier's check or the wire.
Correct.
It's a good estimate to have in your head to look at to make sure. I mean, typically this number is almost the same as, or a good estimate to what we initially sent over to you at the beginning. Some things can change. What are some things that can change from the beginning loan estimate until the closing disclosure that would change the figures in any way?
Yeah, so they're
homeowners insurance.
Yeah, homeowners insurance can change because at the beginning, the homeowners insurance is just our best guess of what it might be. We'll throw $100, $150 a month in there, but we'll actually use whatever agent and whatever quote that the buyer chooses. So that could change. There's tax proration charges or credits that can be on there. A seller credit that you could have gotten after the inspection period. What else would change possibly?
Earnest money deposit. You may put additional earnest money deposit. We do want you to review the closing disclosure.
That's
not alone do we want you to sign it.
Yeah.
We do want you to take a look at it. We will as well, but we would like you to look at it to make sure it is all the credits do show up. So speak up. This is a good time to review it, ask questions, sign it, because we still have some time yet to make some decisions. This week, this closing week that you introduced, Maddie, is the most important week for us about executing all the details. This is where typically we differentiate ourselves from other lenders because this is where a lot of the delays occur. When you hear, oh, my closing was delayed 2 days, my closing was delayed a week, it's usually in closing week. Either there's an issue with the final underwriting or there's an issue with the CD not getting out. We really watch these details, and we're watching the calendar. So this is not something you have to be concerned about as far as checking every day to see if the closing, we will make sure this occurs.
And
this
at this point,
very important.
That our team will be in high communication with you. So you'll be familiar with our team, ourselves, obviously, at this point, and we'll stay in touch with you to make sure this is a crucial timeline. Ask any questions you have at this point, and we'll make sure everything's on track for you.
Definitely. And at this point, too, we are avidly communicating with both you and the realtors on both sides as well, making sure, before this, we would have gotten the clear to close to everyone so that you were able to schedule. And now we're giving you this closing disclosure. We're not sending this to the realtor. This is our communication with you. And really just making sure that you are still comfortable with everything in this process. All right. So that's the closing disclosure. Then next we get the final closing disclosure. So Joe, can you go over, or Sam, what this final closing disclosure looks like?
So sometimes it'll be very similar to the closing disclosure you received earlier in the week.
Yeah, that's
typically we hope, and we don't have complete control of this because now the title company's involved, the seller's involved, both agents might be involved as far as maybe there's a question about a condo association proration or some little detail that's holding up the final numbers. And so we're actively following up with the title company. Our closers are in touch with them trying to get this finalized. But we like to have this 48 hours ideally before closing to give you enough time to go to your bank and get a cashier's check, or go to your bank and initiate a wire. And that is typically the two different options that you'll have. We are going to send you an email with a final closing disclosure attached. In the body of the email, it's going to be very clear. These are your final figures. It is now time to secure a cashier's check, or now it's time to secure a wire initiation. This is the exact number, and it's made out to the title company. One really common misconception is that the bank closes the transaction, or that they're bringing money to the bank. The title company is responsible. It's also referred to as escrow company. And the reason it's referred to as escrow is that's when the closing occurs. They hold all the money in escrow and disperse all the funds in and out. So they touch every dollar that's going on in this transaction. So the cashier's check or wire will be made to the title company.
One thing that I want to point out is that typically you do get the option of either or with cashier's check or wire, but some title companies do set limits. So maybe everything over $20,000 has to be a wire. We will definitely make sure to get with the title company beforehand to see what options they have, and to make sure that what we're telling you, if you can do a cashier's check or a wire, is accurate, to make sure that you didn't get a cashier's check when, you get to the closing table and they only take wires. We'll make sure to do our due diligence beforehand and let you know exactly the process that you should go through. And one thing that we want to point out is that if we get with the title company and they say that they're going to need a wire, they will send you the wire instructions. But we always recommend that you call the title company as well, just to confirm over the phone exactly where these funds are needing to be sent. Fraud is so prevalent nowadays, and we just want to make sure that you are going to be sending that money exactly where it needs to go. So that's why, if we send you an email, if you get an email from the title company, doesn't hurt to just give a quick phone call over to confirm the details and exactly where it needs to be sent, so that you can relay that back to your bank if a wire needs to be set up.
Yeah, wire fraud is prevalent, as you've indicated, and it's one of the more sophisticated frauds that occurs. These fraudsters are unbelievable. They watch the transaction. Somehow they can see what's going on. They get one of the unsecure email threads. Fortunately, we're in a banking institution. We have secure email. But at some point, they get access to some of these emails. And they're very good at manipulating the email to appear that it's coming from the realtor, the title company, us. And So what we tell our customers, never respond to like if you're getting an email saying initiate a wire within a couple days of closing, you have to talk to the title company, call one of us, call your realtor partner, call someone that you know and trust and that you can verify this information. Because once it happens, there's no bringing that wire back. It's gone forever.
Look up the number independently to the title company, call them directly, call us directly, make sure you have all of that information dialed in.
Definitely.
And then one thing I wanted to touch on too was the 3-day closing disclosure and that final closing disclosure and what might change on it. What we do in the beginning is do our very best to cushion those numbers up to give you that worst case scenario. So that might be one thing that all of a sudden you have that 3-day closing disclosure, and then 2 days later, all of a sudden your numbers are inflated by $5,000. That is not typically going to happen. We'll do our very best to give you that worst case scenario up front. And then so the final numbers come in, a lot of times lower than what that initial estimate was. So.
Yeah, and our initial is our best. When you say cushion, I think you're referring to like just being conservative on the estimates, that maybe number of days of interest, the title fees. Sometimes we don't even know who the title company is, so it's hard to get exact numbers there. So yes, that we don't want surprises. Any surprises that in a situation where it did increase, that really should only occur because there's some kind of negotiation. Maybe you and the seller agreed upon something else.
Exactly.
Purchasing something or adding something to the transaction. So
definitely. Another key point to remember, just because maybe we've ran into this situation before, is during this closing week, right before closing, even though the end is in sight, this does not mean that you can go and open up a new line of credit or, sometimes people get super excited and they want to go out and they open up a credit card at Furniture Row or somewhere to get all the new furniture for their house and get all their decorations, which is so awesome. But please, please, please do not do anything with your credit. Do not do anything with your employment, Please do not retire during the process. Do not quit your job during this final week. Those are some things that can screw up the closing date and have things pushed back. So during this time, it is just as important as the beginning of the process to just make sure that everything stays the same. Don't max out any credit cards. Don't open new debt. Don't do anything there with your employment. Keep everything the same so that we can make sure to stay on track and get you to the closing table.
And if you contemplate one of those things, let us know. Because
yeah.
it may, if your car breaks down and you have to get to work, there might be an option, but please just let us know so we can help manage that process.
Yeah, because we do that before closing. There's a soft credit pull, so we'll know if something changes on your credit. We do a verbal verification of employment with your current employer, so we'll know if you're no longer with their company. So if any of those big changes are happening, or if you need help with one of those things or have questions, definitely give us a call.
Yes, any heads up that you can give us will just help us to troubleshoot, provide options, and just let you know what the impact of that decision is going to have on the mortgage process and if we'll be able to close. So oftentimes we are able to come up with a solution. We'll still be able to get you to the closing table, but it's just best to not make any of those changes. I recently had someone, they were like, just really need to get this boat beforehand. I'm like, okay, I know you really want this, but please just do it after closing.
Exactly.
Anything that you want to do, go ahead and do it after the closing table, after you sign, but just try to keep it.
We've seen it all.
Yes, we have definitely seen it all. So that's why we're here, to give you a heads up so that you as the future home buyer or future investor know exactly what to do and what not to do when it comes to that final closing week. All right, so we've gotten the closing disclosure, which we have signed 3 days before closing. We have then gotten the final closing disclosure, which has exactly how much we need to bring to the closing table. We've gone and gotten our cashier's check or set up our wire. Now is the final day, the day that we have been waiting for however long. We get to closing day. So oftentimes we get asked, we get to this point and people are like, okay, well, where am I actually going? what am I supposed to be doing at this closing day? You know, is it going to be at the house? Am I just going to the realtor's office? Am I going to my bank? What actually happens on this day? So Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can go through, you know, what the closing day looks like.
That's a great point, because a lot, again, communication. We've had situations where we have a couple or two borrowers, one that is in a different location. That's
always fun.
Across the country. It is, and it does happen more frequently than you may think. So again, it is important right up front to talk about it. Are both borrowers going to be at the closing, or available to be at the closing? And the quarterback of location and time is typically going to be your buyer's agent. We're going to let both agents and the title company know when we're ready to go, when we're clear to schedule, which was usually going to be the week before, and let you know this date's going to work. And then that's going to be communication you need to have with your agent. I would like to close in person. I would like to close via mobile notary. There's always an option. Yeah. Even when you have two people across the country, we can make that work. Again, we just need to know, and more importantly, your agent needs to know. But typically, the buyer would go to the title company. Sometimes the title company might meet at the realtor's office, or you might meet at the title company. That's more common. And I would say it's very common right now. It's just the buyer. I think there are times where the seller will be there, but I think it's more common than not that it's just the buyer and your realtor and the title closer.
And the seller can close ahead of time too. So that's a lot of times people don't realize that as well. As soon as we give that clear to close, the seller may close 2 days before the buyer, and they may never meet, or you know, they could be at the same closing table and going through all the, you know, here's the keys and here's the weird things about the house and all that stuff. So, and
the borrower can't close before the closing date. So whatever the documents are dated, it has to be signed that date. It doesn't mean you can't close earlier than your contract date, but we have to have the documents have to line up with you can't close before.
And we do have one newer high technology option, which we call our hybrid option, to where it'll actually save our buyer's time at the closing table, to where any document that doesn't necessarily need to be notarized can be clicked and e-signed ahead of time before closing. So that can cut down time for our buyers at the actual closing table to sign some of the documents electronically ahead of time. So that's a great option.
Which we've gotten some great feedback on that especially from realtors as well. They're like, oh my gosh, that was so great. It was so quick and easy for them to come in, because once you get to the closing table, definitely be prepared to sign a decent amount of documents. So your hand will most likely be sore at the end of the day, but the hybrid option just helps so that you can also review some of those closing documents before and go through and e-sign them in the comfort of your home. But the e-sign documents, those have to be signed the day of as well. Those aren't documents that can be signed the day before, a couple days before. Those also have to be dated of the same day as your closing. So that's just one thing.
But they can be reviewed.
Yeah, that's
typically the day before. And any of our closing documents, whether it's hybrid or not, can be. But the hybrid does make it nice, because you're going to that same location you've been, the portal to look where you've signed the initial disclosures, the CD. It'll be there, so it'll make it very easy for you to do that. I would say the biggest issue at closing, that's not mortgage specific by any means, is occupancy. That is definitely something that gets, you get distracted with all the excitement of everything that's going on with your closing, and you're thinking, oh, I can't wait to get in the house today. And you find out,
wait a minute.
Well, it's going to be 10 days.
You agree.
It's going to be 20 days. So occupancy, it's just easy to forget about it. It's easy. Sometimes the agents even forget about it. So that's something you definitely want to talk about, you know, maybe in that first week after you have your accepted offer, of just making reassured. And then maybe again, the closing week, saying, okay, we're going to take possession today. Is that what's occurring? And make sure you have a clear understanding, because that can be really frustrating if you've already scheduled your moving trucks and you don't have occupancy. It's kind of a problem.
Yeah, and that's something you want to discuss with your agent, because they'll have all the details. And if you aren't getting immediate occupancy, you know, they'll handle getting the rent back from the sellers. So they'll get all that figured out for you. But yeah, just make sure you know all those details with your buyer's agent.
Definitely. All right. And then one other thing is that once you get to closing day, a couple of things that you need to bring to the closing table. So if you are going to be getting a cashier's check, definitely don't forget to bring that cashier's check. Very important to have that. And you will also need to make sure that you have your ID on you, a valid ID that has not been expired. This can be driver's license, it can be a passport, government issued ID, but you just need to make sure that you have that with you for the notary. That's really it that you need to bring to the closing table. You don't need to prepare anything or bring anything else. So super simple there. And then a couple of the closing documents that you will get on closing days. So you will have been able to review a lot of these before, but some things for us that are in there, you do have 2 payment coupons that are going to be in the closing package. So these are just reminders of, when your first payment is going to be due, and helps to make sure that you have the avenue of where to make that first payment. But also in these closing documents should be a sheet to get signed up for automatic payments as well. It's called the ACH, where, the payments are automatically drafted from your account to pay for the mortgage. And we highly, highly recommend that you get this set up because, life happens, things happen, and it's just peace of mind to be able to know that your mortgage is going to be paid on time every month if you have those automatic payments set up. So if you do plan on setting up automatic payments, you can also bring in your banking information, your account number, your routing number, information like that to get it set up. Or you can call your banking institution or whoever is going to be holding your mortgage to get that set up after the loan as well. You just need to make sure that it is set up prior to that first payment being due. And then that goes into another point of oftentimes people get a little confused on when their first payment is actually due. So Sam, can you explain kind of like what determines when their first payment is?
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be, if you close in, say, September, you won't have a first payment until November 1st. So your payment's always going to be due on the 1st of the month, and it will typically be due 2 months after you actually close. So if you close in September, your first payment will be due in November. And then, the automatic payment is definitely a great option. And you'll also receive within the signing, there's what's called a first payment letter. So that will lay all of this out. It typically comes with a few coupons for those first payments, and it'll have the exact breakdown of your monthly payment. It'll show when your first payment's due, and you'll receive a copy of all of the closing documents that you sign at closing. So definitely keep an eye out for that, and the title agent will be there going through all the documents with you at closing, so they'll be able to answer any questions you have, and they're extremely familiar with all the documents because they do that day in and day out, so they'll be able to answer any questions you have there.
Yeah, and with this whole closing week, the regulars did do a very good job with the closing disclosure because it really did take a lot of stress out, and it shouldn't be there shouldn't be surprises. There was a time years ago where the numbers would change, and a lot of there wasn't a closing disclosure. So if something occurred during the transaction, you didn't see it till like right before closing. That's not the case. So closing day should be a pretty relaxed environment of, I've seen this for the third time,
exactly
fourth time maybe.
Like. Yeah,
you know what you're getting into. You should be able just to enjoy your closing experience, enjoy talking with the realtor and the seller if they're there, and finding out more about the house, ask any questions, of course. But it should be a pretty comforting, setting. I would say time-wise too. I mean, we do get that question. How long does it usually take? What do you think, Sam?
Well, with the hybrid option, you can be in and out probably less than a half hour. If you're not doing the hybrid option, signing all the documents, a lot of times, all the closings I've been to, you can get caught up in conversation. So if you're
especially
super excited,
if I'm there.
yeah, exactly. So depends on if you go in with the mindset of just turn the page and sign it, you can get in and out very quickly, probably less than a half hour. Or if you have time on your hands and took the whole day off, just enjoy it, and you can probably get through it in an hour or so if you're asking questions and having conversation.
Definitely. All right. Any other final thoughts on closing days? Anything there? I think that did a really good wrap up of everything to expect during the closing process. So we went over the different documents that you're going to be receiving during the week, the closing disclosure, the final closing disclosure, when to get that wire or the cashier's check, and what it looks like on that closing day. So again, if you have any other questions or any other topics that you want us to touch on, please don't hesitate to reach out. But that is going to be the end of today's episode. We hope you enjoyed, and please, rate our podcast, give us a 5-star rating, let us know how we're doing. We would love to hear from you. But that is it on today's episode of Real Take Real Estate with the Joseph team. Thank you so much.